For nearly a decade, owning a diner had been my life's ambition. It wasn't just a business, it was a sanctuary, a cozy haven where locals gathered for hearty breakfasts, travelers savored quick meals, and regulars lingered over steaming mugs of coffee. The diner, with its checkered floors and neon-lit jukebox, felt like an extension of myself. I cherished the late-night hours most, when the chaos of the day faded, leaving only the hum of the refrigerator and the soft clink of dishes, as I balanced the books over a cup of chamomile tea. But one Thursday night, the familiar warmth of my diner twisted into something far more sinister. It was a sluggish evening, the kind where the clock seems to drag. By 8:30 p.m., the dinner rush had dwindled to a mere trickle, leaving just me, Amy, my ever-reliable server, and Joe, the grizzled cook who could flip a burger with the precision of a surgeon. The air still carried the smoky scent of grilled onions and sizzling patties, and the jukebox murmured a soft country tune in the corner. Amy busied herself wiping down the counters, her ponytail swinging as she moved, while Joe scrubbed the grill, his apron stained with the day's labor. We traded lighthearted jabs about Joe's abysmal poker skills from the previous week's game, laughing over the quirks of our regular customers and speculating about who might show up for the breakfast shift. It was the kind of easy camaraderie that made slow nights feel like home. Then, at around 9 p.m., the bell above the door chimed, slicing through our banter. We all turned, expecting a late-night regular, but instead, a stranger shuffled in. His appearance immediately set me on edge. His oversized jacket hung loosely on his gaunt frame, the fabric worn and patched at the elbows. His jeans were frayed, the cuffs unraveling like they'd been dragged through too many miles of rough road. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, giving him the look of someone who hadn't slept in days. Yet, there was nothing overtly menacing about him, just an air of exhaustion that made him seem more pitiful than dangerous. "Just coffee," he muttered, his voice low and gravelly, as he slid into a booth by the window. Amy glanced at me, her brow raised slightly, and I gave her a nod. She grabbed a fresh pot and a chipped ceramic mug, her usual cheerfulness undimmed. "Sure thing," she said, pouring the coffee with a smile. He waved off the menu, saying he was waiting for a ride, and wrapped his hands around the mug as if seeking warmth, though he never took a sip. His gaze fixed on the dark parking lot outside, where the neon glow of the diner's sign cast flickering shadows across the asphalt. By 10 p.m., the diner was nearly empty, and the man hadn't moved. The coffee sat untouched, steam long gone. Amy approached him again, her smile faltering just a bit. "Sir, need anything else? We're getting ready to close soon." He barely acknowledged her, his eyes flicking briefly in her direction before returning to the window. "He's giving me a weird vibe," Amy whispered to me as she passed by the counter, her voice tinged with unease. I brushed it off, trying to keep the mood light. "Probably just tired. His ride'll show up." At 10:30, Joe emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a rag. "You want me to stick around, boss?" he asked, nodding toward the man. I hesitated, glancing at the stranger's still form. "Nah, I've got this. You and Amy head out." Amy's eyes lingered on me, concern etched into her features. "You sure?" "He's off." I forced a smile. "It's fine. He's just waiting. Go on, get some rest." They exchanged a glance, but eventually gathered their things and left, the bell jingling as the door swung shut behind them. By 11 p.m., my patience was fraying. The diner was officially closed, and the man still sat there, his coffee cold and untouched. I approached his booth, my tone firm but polite. "Sir, we're closed now. If your ride hasn't shown, I can give you directions to the gas station. Down the road." He didn't look at me. "They'll be here," he said, his voice flat, almost hollow. Something in his tone sent a chill down my spine, like a cold finger tracing my back. I turned away, flipping the neon open sign to closed, and locking the front doors, the click of the deadbolt loud in the quiet. That's when he changed. "You're really gonna shut me out?" he snapped, his voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the stillness. I spun around, startled. His eyes were on me now, intense and unblinking. "I'm sorry, but we're closed," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You need to wait outside." He stood abruptly, towering over me, his frame suddenly seeming larger than it had before. "You think you can take what's mine and get away with it?" he shouted, slamming his fists on the table. The crash of his hands against the wood made my heart lurch. "What are you talking about?" I stammered, backing toward the counter. My mind raced, searching for any clue to what he meant. Had I served him before? Did he think I'd shortchanged him? His eyes burned with a strange, misplaced rage. "You owe me," he roared, his voice echoing in the empty diner. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911. The dispatcher's calm voice answered, and I whispered, "There's a man in my diner. He's acting aggressive, and I'm alone." "Stay on the line," the dispatcher said. "Officers are on their way." I locked myself in the kitchen, my pulse pounding in my ears. Through the small window in the door, I watched the man pace, his movements jerky and erratic. Then he stopped, his attention shifting to the cash register. He tugged at it, his frustration mounting when it wouldn't open. "Come on," he bellowed, slamming his fists against the counter. When that failed, he grabbed a stool and hurled it across the room. The crash of metal against tile made me flinch, my breath catching in my throat. His gaze snapped to the kitchen door, and he stormed over, pounding on it with both fists. The wood rattled under the force. "You can't hide forever," he shouted, his voice thick with fury. "I'll catch you, and you won't get away." His face pressed against the window, his features twisted into a snarl. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone, the dispatcher's voice a lifeline. "Officers are almost there. Hold on." Suddenly, red and blue lights flashed outside, cutting through the darkness. The man froze, his head whipping toward the window. In an instant, he bolted for the front door, fumbling with the lock in a desperate bid to escape. I held my breath as tires screeched in the parking lot. 2 officers burst in, shouting for him to stop. He stumbled into the lot, trying to run, but one officer tackled him to the ground, the other swiftly cuffing him. I unlocked the kitchen door, my legs shaky as I stepped out. "Are you okay?" one officer asked, his voice gentle but firm. I nodded, though my hands still trembled. "Yeah, just shaken up." They led the man to the patrol car, where he sat, yelling incoherently. "Do you know him?" the officer asked. I shook my head. Never seen him before. He came in tonight and wouldn't leave. The officer explained that the man had been linked to a string of break-ins and erratic behavior at small businesses in the area. "You're lucky," he said. "This could have been worse." Lucky. The word lingered as I surveyed the diner, its familiar warmth now tainted by the night's events. The next day, I implemented new rules. No lingering past closing, and no one stays alone at night. Amy, Joe, and I now leave together, the bell jingling as we lock up as a team. The diner still feels like home, but it's a home with shadows now. I used to see it as a beacon of comfort in the night. Now, I know the darkness can creep in, and I'll never let my guard down again. That I'd been working at the diner for 6 months, a job that fit neatly around my college schedule and paid just enough to keep my beat-up Honda running. The diner was a lively spot, with its retro red booths and the constant hum of conversation. But it was the late shifts I loved most, those quiet hours when the world slowed down, and I could focus on refilling coffee mugs and bantering with the regulars. But one night, a routine shift turned into a nightmare that still haunts me. It was a Friday, and the evening rush had been hectic, with trays of burgers and fries flying out of the kitchen. By 10 p.m., the crowd had thinned, and I was in the groove, weaving between tables with a coffee pot in one hand and a rag in the other. That's when I noticed him, a man sitting alone in a corner booth, his hands wrapped around a coffee mug. He was in his mid-40s, unremarkable at first glance, with a faded baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. But something about him felt off. Every time I glanced his way, his eyes were on me, unblinking and intense that I brushed it off at first. People stare sometimes, it's part of the job. But his gaze wasn't the usual, "I need a refill" look, or even the vacant stare of someone lost in thought. It was predatory, like he was memorizing me. When I checked on him, he flashed a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're a busy guy, huh?" he said, his voice low and deliberate. "Yeah, Fridays can get hectic," I replied, keeping my tone light, but stepping back slightly. "You in school?" he pressed, his eyes sharpening. I nodded, instantly regretting it. "Yeah, at the university." His smile widened, unnervingly. "So, must be tough, juggling work and school." "Just enjoying the view." His words sent a shiver through me, but I forced myself to stay professional, moving on to other tables. By midnight, the diner was nearly empty, and I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw his booth empty. He'd left about an hour earlier, and the tension in my shoulders eased. I finished wiping down tables, cashed out my tips, and clocked out, eager to get home to my couch and a bowl of cereal. The parking lot was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the highway. I climbed into my Honda, started the engine, and pulled onto the road, the diner's neon sign fading in my rearview mirror. About 10 minutes into the drive, I noticed headlights behind me. At first, I thought nothing of it. Small town, same routes, it happens. But when I turned onto a quieter road, the headlights followed. I made another turn, this time onto a side street I rarely took. The car stayed with me. A knot of dread formed in my stomach. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I made a series of random turns through the sleepy neighborhood streets, my heart pounding faster with each one. The car followed, maintaining a steady distance, its headlights glaring in my mirrors. My hands tightened on the wheel as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. "I think someone's following me," I said, my voice shaking. "I just left work, and this car's been behind me for 15 minutes, following every turn." "Where are you?" the dispatcher asked. I gave my location, glancing nervously at the rearview mirror. "Keep driving," she said. "Head to the police station. Officers will meet you there." I pressed the gas, fear urging me faster. The car behind me didn't back off. If anything, it closed the distance, its headlights blinding. I took a sharp turn, my tires screeching, and the car followed, relentless. The dispatcher's voice was calm, grounding me. "You're doing great. Just a few more blocks." Finally, the police station came into view, its floodlights cutting through the night. I pulled into the lot, my hands trembling, and the car behind me slowed, then veered sharply and sped off. Into the darkness, I stumbled out of my car, my legs like jelly, as two officers approached. "Are you okay?" one asked. I nodded, catching my breath. "Yeah, but they're gone now. They turned off when I got here." They took my statement, but I could only offer a vague description, a dark sedan, maybe black or navy. The officers promised to patrol the area, but without more details, there was little they could do. Driving home that night, every set of headlights felt like a threat, every turn a potential ambush. I parked in my driveway, bolted inside, and checked every lock twice. For weeks, the memory of that night clung to me. I started parking closer to the diner's entrance, checking my mirrors obsessively on the drive home, and avoiding late shifts when I could. Whoever that man was, whatever he wanted, he'd shattered my sense of safety. The diner was still my job, but the open road at night? That felt like a gauntlet I'd never run the same way again. As the manager of a small diner, I'd grown accustomed to the rhythm of night shifts. The quiet hours after midnight were my favorite, when the bustle of the day gave way to a calm that let me focus on inventory and paperwork while keeping an eye on the floor. The diner, with its warm lighting and familiar faces, was a comforting constant. But about 3 months ago, that comfort began to erode, replaced by a creeping unease that started with a series of unsettling phone calls. At first, the calls were harmless, heavy breathing, a muffled laugh, then a click as the line went dead. They came late at night, usually when the diner was nearly empty, and I dismissed them as pranks, likely bored kids with too much time on their hands. But then the calls changed. "Are you alone tonight?" a voice asked one night, comment. Deliberate, devoid of any playful tone. I froze, the receiver cold against my ear. "Excuse me," I said, but the line went dead. I shook it off, telling myself it was just another prank, but the question lingered, sharp and intrusive. The calls became a pattern, every few nights. Always the same voice, always the same question. "Are you alone tonight?" I started letting the staff answer the phone, hoping to deter the caller, but he seemed to know when I picked up. If anyone else answered, he'd hang up without a word. It was as if he was targeting me, his voice a quiet blade that cut deeper with each call. One Friday night, the diner was quieter than usual. An older couple shared a milkshake in a booth, their laughter a soft counterpoint to the jukeboxes. Low hum. In the far corner, a man sat alone, nursing a cup of coffee and a slice of pie he barely touched. He'd been there for over an hour, his presence unremarkable but vaguely unsettling. Something about the way he sat, too still, too focused, made my skin prickle. Then the phone rang. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the receiver. Main Street Diner, how can I help you? I said, my voice steady despite the unease curling in my chest. Are you alone tonight? The voice asked, smooth and chilling. My eyes darted around the room. Who is this? I demanded. The caller chuckled softly. Look to your left. My heart stuttered. Slowly, I turned toward the corner booth. The man was staring at me, a thin smile spreading across his face, his eyes locked on mine. I gripped the phone, my voice barely above a whisper. Who are you? The line went dead. The man's smile didn't waver. I hung up, my hands trembling, and tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he wasn't the caller. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. I moved to the counter, pretending to check the coffee pot while keeping him in my peripheral vision. Jess, you okay? Brenda, one of my waitresses, asked as she emerged from the kitchen. Yeah, just a weird call, I said, forcing a smile. Can you watch table 6? Brenda glanced at the man, her brow furrowing. Sure. What's up with him? Nothing, I lied. Just let me know if he leaves. The man eventually stood and headed toward the restroom. I exhaled, hoping he was finally leaving, but as he passed, he paused. You should answer. Your phone, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. I froze, my heart pounding. He continued to the restroom, the door swinging shut behind him. Minutes later, the phone rang again. My hands shook as I picked it up. Main Street Diner. You didn't ask if I'm still here, the voice said, taunting. I slammed the receiver down. Brenda, I said, my voice firm, call the police. Tell them we have a suspicious person here. Her eyes widened, but she nodded and dialed. I stood by the counter, my gaze fixed on the restroom door, expecting him to burst out at any moment. The silence from the bathroom was almost worse than the noise. 5 minutes later, 2 officers arrived, their presence both calming and jarring. Brenda explained the situation, pointing toward the restroom. One officer stationed himself by the door while the other called out, Sir, we need you to come out. There was a pause, then the sound of shuffling. The door creaked open, and the man stepped out, his demeanor unnervingly calm. Without a word, he let the officers escort him outside. They searched him but found nothing. No phone, no wallet, no identification. After questioning, they let him go with a warning to stay away from the diner. As he walked off into the night, he glanced back, his expression unreadable. I handed over my statement to the officers, who admitted there was little they could do without evidence. The next morning, I found a cracked burner phone and a pair of scuffed wireless headphones near the restroom window, likely tossed out before the police arrived. I turned them over to the authorities, but they were untraceable, dead ends in a case that offered no closure. The call stopped, but the memory of that voice lingers. I no longer answer the phone after dark, leaving it to the staff. The diner still feels like my domain, but it's a domain with a shadow now, one that reminds me that danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it's the quiet, creeping moments that leave the deepest scars. Working the night shift at Lou's Diner was usually uneventful, a predictable routine of serving coffee to truckers and pie to regulars in a slightly worn-down spot on the edge of town. The diner wasn't glamorous, with its faded vinyl booths and flickering neon sign, but it had a certain charm. Closing up was my favorite part. Wiping down counters, sweeping the checkered floor, and locking the cash register while the world outside settled into silence. But one night, that silence turned into something far more unsettling. IT was past midnight, and the last customer had left, leaving only the hum of the refrigerators and the occasional snap of the fluorescent lights. I was running through my closing checklist, clipboard in hand, when a faint rustling sound stopped me cold. It came from the back hallway, near the restrooms, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, like fabric brushing against tile. I froze, listening. The men's room door was slightly ajar, which was odd. I distinctly remembered closing it earlier. When I swept the hall, "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing in the empty diner. No response. The rustling came again, followed by a low, garbled muttering, words I couldn't make out. My pulse quickened. It wasn't uncommon for someone to slip in before closing, maybe a drifter looking for a warm place to rest, but this felt different. Steeling myself, I pushed the restroom door open. The room was empty except for one closed stall at the far end. The muttering continued, soft and disjointed, like someone talking to themselves. "Hey, the diner's closed," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "You can't be in here." The muttering stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. I stepped closer, my sneakers squeaking on the tile. "Sir, do you need help?" The stall door rattled violently, as if someone had thrown their weight against it. I stumbled back, my heart leaping into my throat. "Leave me alone," a man's voice growled, raw and desperate. "I can't let them find me." My stomach twisted. This wasn't a drunk or a vagrant. His voice carried a frantic edge, like he was running from something or someone. "Sir, the diner's closed," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If you need help, I can call someone." The door rattled again, harder, followed by a stream of angry, incoherent words. I backed out, my hands shaking, and slammed the door shut, locking it with the key from my pocket. That I sprinted to the counter, grabbed my phone, and dialed 911. "This is Chris, manager at Lou's Diner," I said, my voice trembling. "There's a guy locked in our bathroom. He's acting aggressive and won't leave." The dispatcher's calm voice instructed me to stay safe and wait for the police. The 10 minutes that followed were agonizing. The man's muttering continued, punctuated by occasional slams against the stall door. I stood by the counter, my eyes darting between the hallway and the front door, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When the police arrived, their presence was like a lifeline. I handed over the bathroom key, my hands still unsteady. The officers approached the stall cautiously, one drawing his bat. "Sir, this is the police," one called. "Step out with your hands where we can see them." Silence, then more muttering, louder now. The officer repeated the command, and finally, the stall door creaked open. The man stepped out, his appearance disheveled, wild eyes, unwashed clothes, and a trembling frame. "They're after me," he shouted, pointing at the officers. "They're everywhere." The officers exchanged a glance, their faces carefully neutral. They guided him out, one speaking softly about getting him help. In the patrol car, he continued to ramble, his words a jumble of fear and paranoia. The officer who stayed behind took my statement. "Do you know him?" he asked. I shook my head. "Never seen him before." He kept saying someone was after him. The officer nodded. "Sounds like he might be struggling with mental illness. We'll make sure he gets help." The explanation was logical, but it didn't erase the image of his wild eyes or the raw desperation in his voice. I locked up in a hurry that night, skipping my usual routine, and drove home with the radio off, the silence heavy. The next morning, I called the owner and pushed for better security, stronger locks, brighter exterior lights, maybe even cameras. Within a week, the changes were in place, but the unease lingered. I still work the night shift, but I'm not the same. I keep my phone close, double-check every lock, and announce myself before entering any room. The diner is still my workplace, but it's no longer the safe haven it once was. That man, whoever he was running from, left me with a truth I can't shake. Even the most familiar places can hide dangers you never see coming.